I was standing in my backyard on a perfectly fine, drizzly Tuesday morning in Portland, Oregon, staring at a piece of paper that was practically vibrating with aggressive fluorescent energy. It was a neon pink Notice of Immediate Violation, signed, sealed, and delivered by the Homeowners Association. And by Homeowners Association, I mean Brenda. Brenda is the kind of neighbor who treats the property line like the demilitarized zone, and whose haircut somehow defies both gravity and modern styling conventions. She's the type of person who measures her Bermuda grass with a literal wooden ruler to ensure it hasn't exceeded the mandated 2.5 inches. I looked from the pink slip in my hand to the object of Brenda's overwhelming fury. It was a compost tumbler, a completely sealed, UV-resistant, heavy-duty black plastic drum suspended on a metal frame. It didn't leak. It didn't squeak. And unless you shoved your nose directly into the aeration vents and inhaled like a vacuum cleaner, it didn't smell. But according to the laminated pink slip I was holding, I was harboring a Class 3 biohazard that was emitting noxious, property-devaluing fumes into the shared community airspace. Noxious fumes? Are you kidding me? It was coffee grounds, banana peels, and crushed eggshells. I wasn't running a black market meth lab or refining crude oil next to the hydrangeas. But Brenda had spoken, and when Brenda spoke, the HOA board blindly followed, because nobody else wanted to sit through her 3-hour PowerPoint presentations on the dangers of mismatched mailbox fonts. Okay, I muttered to myself, tapping the pink paper against my leg. You want to play the game, Brenda? Let's play the game. I read the specific citation she had highlighted in bright yellow marker. Section 4, Paragraph B. No homeowner shall maintain decomposing organic matter, refuse, or unapproved exterior waste receptacles in the backyard or side yard areas visible from the adjacent properties. Notice the phrasing there? Decomposing organic matter, unapproved waste receptacles, backyard or side yard. I smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. You see, I am a very reasonable guy. I like my peace, I like my quiet, and I like my garden. But if there is one thing I cannot stand, it's petty neighborhood tyrants trying to weaponize poorly written municipal and civil codes. I grabbed the handle of the compost tumbler and began rolling it heavily across the wet grass toward the side gate. The plastic wheels rumbled over the pavers. I was taking it to the curb. I was complying. I was being a good, obedient resident of this manicured Portland subdivision, where everyone pretends to be a free-spirited, crunchy nature lover right up until someone's wind chimes are a half decibel too loud. As I pushed the tumbler out the gate and onto my driveway, I heard the familiar, sharp squeak of a sliding glass door. Daniel! I paused, took a deep breath, and plastered on my most sickeningly sweet customer service smile. I turned around. There she was, leaning over the cedar fence, a mug of probably decaf green tea in one hand and her cell phone in the other, already queued up to the HOA complaint portal. Morning, Brenda, I said, leaning casually against the black plastic drum. Beautiful day for compliance, isn't it? I see you got the notice, she said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of smug, breathless condescension usually reserved for scolding toddlers. I'm glad you're finally taking care of that mess. We just can't have this neighborhood smelling like a literal landfill, Daniel. It's about maintaining a civilized society. We have property values to consider. A landfill, Brenda? I asked, keeping my tone impossibly light. I thought it smelled like an earthy blend of single-origin espresso and organic kale, but I suppose olfactory palates differ. Don't worry, though. The unapproved exterior waste receptacle is being permanently removed from the backyard and side yard areas, exactly as the bylaws dictate. She took a sip of her tea, looking triumphant. Good. See that you clean up whatever sludge it left behind, too. I don't want any lingering odors drifting into my sunroom. You're absolutely right, Brenda, I said, nodding vigorously. From now on, I will only produce artisanal, culturally enriching aromas. I'm turning over a new leaf. Thanks for the feedback. She narrowed her eyes, clearly suspicious of my cheerful compliance, but she couldn't find a flaw in the interaction. She gave a curt nod, slid back into her house, and locked the door loudly. I wheeled the compost bin into my garage, shut the door, and immediately got in my car. I didn't drive to work. I didn't drive to a hardware store. I drove straight to the largest international Asian supermarket in the greater Portland metropolitan area. If Brenda hated the faint, earthy smell of wet dirt, she was going to absolutely despise what I was about to unleash. Because she hadn't just banned compost, she had banned decomposing organic matter in unapproved receptacles. But what about fermenting organic matter in approved culinary receptacles? What about the majestic, ancient, aggressively pungent glory of traditional, open-air Korean kimchi and German sauerkraut? I grabbed a flatbed cart and hit the produce aisle like a man on a mission. Napa cabbage. I took 40 heads. Daikon radishes. I cleared the display. Garlic? I bought enough to ward off an entire generation of Victorian vampires. I loaded up on coarse sea salt, intensely spicy gochugaru flakes, fish sauce that smelled like a beautiful, salty ocean trench, and a massive jar of salted shrimp. The cashier looked at me, looked at the mountain of brassicas and alliums on the belt, and raised an eyebrow. "Big party?" he asked. "Nope," I replied, swiping my card. "Just a little neighborhood beautification project." Next, I drove to an antique supply store out in the gorge and dropped entirely too much money on 3 massive, vintage ceramic fermentation crocks. These weren't little mason jars. These were heavy, traditional, thigh-high earthen pots. They were beautiful. They were decorative. And they were going straight onto my front porch. You see, the HOA bylaws specifically banned organic waste in the backyard and side yard. The front porch, however, was governed by a completely different section of the rules, which stated that front porches may display decorative pots, planters, and traditional patio furnishings. A ceramic crock is, by definition, a decorative pot. I spent the next 12 hours in my kitchen acting like a mad scientist. I chopped, salted, massaged, and spiced. My hands burned from the chili flakes. The sheer volume of garlic I was crushing made my eyes water. I packed the salted, spiced cabbage and radishes down into the massive crocks, pressing out the air, letting the natural brine rise to the top. I sealed them with their heavy ceramic lids and dragged all 3 of them out onto my front porch, lining them up perfectly right next to my rocking chair, in full, glorious view of the street. And more importantly, in direct alignment with the prevailing westerly winds that blew straight toward Brenda's pristine sunroom. Day 1, nothing happened. The crocks just sat there, looking rustic and charming. Day 2, the fermentation began. The lactic acid bacteria got to work, breaking down the sugars in the cabbage. By day 4, the biochemical magic was in full swing, and the porch smelled like a highly active, incredibly delicious, extremely aggressive artisanal deli. It was a thick, tangy, sour, garlicky cloud that hung in the humid Portland air. If you love kimchi and sauerkraut, it was heaven. If you are Brenda, it was an act of chemical warfare. I was sitting in my living room, sipping coffee and watching the porch through the front window, when the flashing red and blue lights pulled up. I almost choked on my coffee. She didn't call the HOA. She skipped the board entirely and called the actual police. 2 Portland police officers stepped out of their cruiser. They looked around tentatively, their hands resting on their belts, visibly bracing themselves as they walked up my driveway. One was a tall, serious-looking guy, Officer Davis. The other, Officer Chen, stopped at the bottom of my porch steps and audibly sniffed the air. I opened the front door before they could knock. "Morning, officers. How can I help you?" Officer Chen looked at me, a confused smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "Is somebody making Rubens, or, wait, is that jjigae?" "A little bit of both, actually," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "Traditional sauerkraut in the left crock, spicy kimchi in the right, and a wild card spicy radish ferment in the middle. Just exercising my right to preserve seasonal vegetables. Would you guys care for a sample? It's not quite ready, but the brine is getting there." Officer Davis crossed his arms, looking less amused. "Sir, we received a 911 dispatch for a suspicious, highly toxic chemical odor emanating from this address. The caller stated it was making her physically ill." I pointed directly at the 3 ceramic pots. "That's the toxic chemical odor. It's cabbage, salt, and garlic. It's food. I'm fermenting vegetables." Davis sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Let me guess. The caller lives right there?" He jerked his thumb toward Brenda's house. "Nailed it in one, officer." "Look," Davis said, his tone shifting from authoritative to exhausted. "Obviously, it is not a crime to make sauerkraut, but your neighbor is citing a city nuisance ordinance, Section 8.36, regarding unpleasant neighborhood emissions that substantially interfere with the use and enjoyment of adjacent property. If she pushes this, she can drag code enforcement out here, and they can be a real headache. You might want to tread lightly, man. Just put lids on them or move them inside." "They have lids," I pointed out, tapping the heavy ceramic tops. "They have to vent the gases naturally or they explode. And as for moving them inside, the temperature out here is perfect for a slow, complex fermentation profile." Chen laughed softly. "Just try not to start a neighborhood war over a side dish, okay?" "I appreciate the advice, officers," I said politely. "Have a safe shift." They walked back to their cruiser, shaking their heads. I watched them drive away, and then I looked over at Brenda's house. I could see the slats of her blinds twitching. She was watching. She was seething that the cops hadn't hauled me out in handcuffs. But Davis's warning about the city nuisance ordinance got me thinking. Brenda was shifting tactics. She knew the HOA bylaws on my front porch were fuzzy regarding decorative pots, so she was going for city municipal codes. If she got a zealous code enforcement officer out here, they might just slap a fine on me just to make the complaint go away. I needed a shield. I needed an absolute, impenetrable, ironclad legal defense that superseded both the HOA and a generic city nuisance claim. I went back inside, booted up my laptop, and spent the next 6 hours aggressively digging into Portland municipal codes, zoning laws, and Oregon state statutes. I was looking for a loophole, a technicality, anything I could use to legitimize the massive, pungent science experiment sitting on my front deck. Around 2 a.m., my eyes burning from the blue light of the screen, I struck absolute gold. It was a beautiful, chaotic intersection of 3 different laws. First, Oregon's cottage food operation laws. Under a recently passed bill, individuals could produce and distribute certain low-risk, non-hazardous foods, specifically including naturally fermented, acidic vegetable products, from a residential domicile without a commercial kitchen license. Second, the City of Portland's zoning exemptions. The city had recently passed a sweeping, highly progressive ordinance protecting accessory short-term vending and community food sharing sites. This was designed to protect the proliferation of little free libraries and little free pantries that had popped up all over the city. And third, the kicker. A specific clause in the Oregon revised statutes regarding charitable food distribution explicitly stated that community food sharing sites provided they are offered free of charge and meet basic structural safety guidelines, cannot be prohibited by local neighborhood covenants or municipal nuisance clauses. The law literally viewed giving away free food to the community as protected, untouchable speech and charity. As long as I wasn't selling it, and as long as I distributed it from a structurally compliant stand, it was an untouchable legal burrito. Brenda couldn't touch me. The HOA couldn't touch me. Even the city code enforcement couldn't shut me down without violating state law regarding charitable community pantries. I didn't just need decorative crocks anymore. I needed a pavilion. I needed a shrine to fermented cabbage. The very next morning, before the sun was even fully up, the second HOA letter arrived. It was taped to my front door, right next to the crocks. Notice of violation. Front porch guidelines. All items stored on the front porch must be exclusively decorative or approved patio furniture. Food preparation equipment and unsealed food items are strictly prohibited. You have 24 hours to remove the hazardous materials from your porch, or face a $250 daily fine. I took the letter, folded it into a neat little square, and put it in my pocket. Then, I picked up my phone and called a guy I knew named Chuck. Chuck is a grizzled, chain-smoking local contractor who builds custom decks, sheds, and pergolas. More importantly, Chuck hates homeowners associations more than he hates cheap, warped lumber from big-box hardware stores. I hired him once to build a simple privacy screen for a client's backyard shoot. And he spent 3 hours ranting to me about how an HOA board in Beaverton tried to fine him for the color of his work truck. "Chuck," I said when he answered on the third ring, the sound of a table saw whining in the background. "I have a project for you, and it involves deeply upsetting an HOA president." "I'm listening," Chuck rasped, the saw cutting out. "I need a permitted, structurally sound gazebo-style enclosure built directly onto my front porch. It needs to be beautiful. It needs to be made of high-quality cedar. But most importantly, it needs to legally qualify on paper as an accessory short-term vending structure under Portland Zoning Code 33.266. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Buddy," Chuck finally said, his voice practically purring with malicious intent. "I can build you a Taj Mahal for Cabbage, so long as the check's clear and I get to watch the neighborhood committee cry." "The checks will clear, Chuck. Can you pull the permits today?" "I know a guy down at the city planning office who owes me a favor. I'll have the stamped paperwork by noon. We start tomorrow at 7 a.m. The next morning was a symphony of chaos. Exactly at 7 a.m., Chuck's massive, battered F250 pulled into my driveway, followed by a flatbed truck loaded with premium aromatic cedar planks. 3 large guys in high-vis vests jumped out, hauling air compressors, nail guns, and massive chop saws right onto my front lawn. They immediately fired up a heavy-duty job site radio, blasting classic rock into the quiet, dewy suburban morning. I stepped out onto the porch holding 2 thermoses of coffee. Brenda's front door flew open so fast I thought it might rip off the hinges. She stormed out in a plush white bathrobe, her face pale with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she screeched over the sound of AC/DC and an air compressor cycling up. "You cannot do construction at 7 a.m., and you certainly cannot build an unapproved structure on your porch. I am calling the board. I am calling the police." Chuck, who was currently measuring a massive cedar post, didn't even look up. He just pulled a crumpled, official-looking document from his heavy canvas work jacket and waved it blindly in the air. "City of Portland noise ordinance permits construction noise starting at 7 a.m. on weekdays, lady," Chuck yelled back, grinning around an unlit cigarette. "And we got expedited, stamped municipal permits for a structural porch modification. Approved and filed. Go back to bed. Brenda looked like she was going to have an aneurysm. She marched right up to the edge of my property line, her fuzzy pink slippers getting soaked in the wet grass. Daniel, what are you building? Just complying with the HOA guidelines, Brenda, I called out cheerfully, handing a coffee to one of the crew members. You said the porch items needed to be approved patio structures. I'm just making sure my decorative crocks are properly housed according to city safety standards. Have a great day. She spun around, practically vibrating with rage, and stomped back inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For the next 2 days, Chuck and his crew worked like absolute demons. They didn't just build a shelter. They built a masterpiece. It was a stunning, Japanese-inspired cedar pavilion that integrated seamlessly into the existing architecture of my porch. It had a pitched, rain-proof roof, decorative lattice work on the sides, and a beautiful, solid hardwood counter at the front. It looked like a high-end artisanal kiosk you'd find at an upscale farmer's market. And perfectly nestled inside, protected from the rain but completely exposed to the open air, were my 3 massive, bubbling crocks of fermented glory. But a beautiful structure wasn't enough. I needed to trigger the legal loophole. I needed to make it a community asset. I went to a local print shop and ordered a custom, professionally routed wooden sign. On the 3rd day, as Chuck was packing up his tools, I hung the sign proudly from the front beam of the cedar pavilion. It read, Daniel's Free Community Pantry Artisanal Ferments and Preserved Goods. Take a jar, leave a smile. Registered Oregon Cottage Food Operation number 88492. The structure was finished. The legal trap was set. Now, I just needed customers. I went to a local restaurant supply store and bought 100 small glass mason jars. I sterilized them, printed out cute little waterproof labels detailing the ingredients and the date of fermentation, and began the messy process of transferring the perfectly sour, deeply pungent kimchi and sauerkraut from the massive crocks into the individual jars. I lined the jars up on the beautiful cedar counter. I put a small, sanitized pair of tongs in a container, a stack of paper napkins, and a little guest book for people to leave comments. Then, I went on the neighborhood Facebook group, Next Door, and a local Portland food sharing app. I made a simple post. Hey neighbors, I've set up a fully permitted free community pantry on my front porch, currently stocked with huge batches of traditional, homemade, small batch kimchi and sauerkraut. Totally free, grab a jar while supplies last. Let's build community through food. I hit post, sat back in my rocking chair right next to the stand, and waited. It didn't take long. This is Portland, after all. If you offer free, artisanal, small batch anything, people will find you. Within 30 minutes, a guy in his 20s with a beanie and a fixie bike rolled up into my driveway. He looked at the stand, looked at me, and his eyes lit up. Dude, is this for real? He asked, pointing at a vibrant red jar of kimchi. Free? Absolutely free, man, I said. Take 2. The daikon radish one is really spicy, just a heads up. Sick. Thanks, man. My roommates are going to love this. He grabbed 2 jars, waved, and rode off. An hour later, a minivan pulled up. A mom and 2 kids got out. She walked up to the porch, reading the sign carefully. This is such a wonderful idea, she said, genuinely smiling. My husband loves sauerkraut on his hot dogs, and you can never find the real, unpasteurized stuff at the store anymore. Take a big jar, I insisted, and feel free to sign the guest book. By the afternoon, it was a steady stream. Hipsters, soccer moms, retired couples walking their dogs, even a couple of college kids who lived a few streets over. The neighborhood loved it. My front porch turned into a bustling, chatty little social hub. People were meeting each other, talking about recipes, swapping gardening tips. It was genuinely a beautiful, wholesome community moment. And all the while, the intense, vinegary, garlic-heavy aroma of the open crocks wafted directly into Brenda's pristine living room windows whenever the wind blew west. I could see her standing just inside her house, her silhouette framed by the window. She was watching the soccer moms laugh with me. She was watching the hipsters rave about the spice level. She was watching her entirely manufactured narrative of me being a neighborhood nuisance crumble into dust, replaced by my new reputation as the generous, quirky guy who gives away amazing food. It was driving her absolutely insane. I knew it. She knew it. The next day, I had to make another batch just to restock the counter. The demand was wild. I was out there on the porch, wearing an apron, happily packing a fresh mix of cabbage and chili paste into the crocks, humming to myself. The smell was magnificent, a sharp, acidic tang that cut through the humid afternoon air. Suddenly, a sleek silver sedan pulled up to the curb, parking directly in front of my house. Brenda stepped out of the passenger side, but she wasn't alone. From the driver's side emerged a tall, stiff-looking man in a sharply tailored suit holding a leather-bound portfolio. It was Arthur, the president of the HOA board. And from the back seat, a third man emerged. He was wearing a city-issued polo shirt, a heavy utility belt with a radio, and carrying a metallic clipboard. A city code enforcement officer. The boss fight had arrived. I watched them march up my driveway like the absolute least fun parade in suburban history. Honestly, I could literally see Brenda vibrating with excitement. She was practically skipping. She finally got the heavy hitters, I guess. I wiped my hands on my apron, grabbed a fresh towel, and leaned casually against the solid cedar counter of my beautiful, legally impenetrable cabbage pavilion. Arthur, the HOA president, reached the bottom of the porch steps first. He adjusted his tie, looking down his nose at my Crocs. "Daniel," he said, using his best disappointed dad voice, "we need to have a very serious conversation about this unauthorized commercial operation you've decided to run on your property." "Arthur?" I beamed, like I was greeting an old friend I hadn't seen in years. "Man, it's good to see you. Are you a kimchi guy or a sauerkraut guy? I mean, the daikon radish is literally peaking right now. It's got this incredible, funky tang." "I don't want your rotting vegetables," Arthur snapped, his professional veneer slipping for a second before he caught himself. He gestured to the man in the utility belt. "This is Gary. He is with City Code Enforcement. Brenda submitted a formal complaint regarding an illegal business, unpermitted structural modifications, and a severe neighborhood nuisance." Gary stepped forward, looking bored, exhausted, and completely over it. He clicked his pen and looked at his clipboard. "Sir, you're Daniel?" "That's me, Gary. Welcome to the neighborhood pantry. What seems to be the issue?" Brenda couldn't contain herself anymore. She shoved past Arthur, her face flushed red. "The issue, Daniel, is that you are running a biohazard facility in a residential zone. It stinks. It's a magnet for pests. You built an illegal storefront, you're distributing uninspected toxic food, and you are violating like 50 different neighborhood covenants." "Tell him, Gary. Shut it down and fine him." Gary sighed deeply. "Ma'am, please let me conduct the assessment." He turned back to me. "Look, man, I'm just here to follow up on the citations. We have a report of an unpermitted commercial vending structure, violation of residential health codes regarding open food fermentation, and a general public nuisance complaint regarding the smell." Gary sniffed the air. He actually didn't look offended by the smell, just observant. "I completely understand, Gary," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. Honestly, if I were running an unpermitted commercial vending structure, I'd expect you to shut me right down. But I'm not. I reached under the cedar counter. I didn't pull out a jar of cabbage. I literally pulled out a 2-inch thick, brightly color-coded tabbed binder. I dropped it on the counter with a heavy, satisfying thud. Classic sovereign ruling move. You never argue with a bureaucrat. You just bury them in better paperwork than they have. Exhibit A, I said, flipping to the first tab. You said unpermitted structural modification. Here is the expedited, stamped, and approved city building permit for an accessory short-term vending structure, signed by the city planning office 3 days ago. My contractor, Chuck, pulled it himself. The Cedar Pavilion is 100% up to municipal code. I spun the binder around so Gary could see it. He adjusted his glasses, leaned in, and ran his finger over the raised city seal. Well, it's got the stamp. Structure is cleared, Gary mumbled, making a quick check mark on his clipboard. Arthur's face twitched. Fine, the structure is permitted by the city, but it violates HOA guidelines for front porches, and you are running a food business without a license. Exhibit B, I said, flipping to the second tab. I tapped a laminated certificate slid into a clear plastic sleeve. This is my registered Oregon Cottage food operation card. State law allows individuals to produce and distribute certain low-risk, non-hazardous foods, specifically including naturally acidic, fermented vegetable products, from a residential domicile without a commercial kitchen license. The food is perfectly legal, and the health department is fully aware. Brenda let out a shrill, frustrated noise. He's not just producing it, Gary. He's running a store. He's giving it away to transients and strangers. It's a nuisance. Which brings me to Exhibit C, I said, my smile widening into a full, predatory grin. I flipped to the third tab. The grand finale, the nuisance claim, and the HOA covenant override. I pointed to a highlighted section of printed legal text. Gary, I'm sure you're familiar with the recent Portland zoning exemptions and the Oregon revised statutes regarding charitable community food distribution. Specifically, the Little Free Pantry exemptions. Gary stopped writing on his clipboard. He looked up at me, his eyes widening just a fraction. He knew exactly what I was talking about. I mean, as you can see by my signage, this is not a business. I am not selling anything, I explained, gesturing grandly to the wooden sign above my head. This is a registered, free community pantry, and under Oregon state statute, charitable community food sharing sites that are offered free of charge and meet basic structural safety guidelines cannot be prohibited by local neighborhood covenants, HOA bylaws, or municipal nuisance clauses regarding odors or foot traffic. State law protects this as an act of community charity. I tapped the paper. In short, Arthur, your HOA bylaws don't mean squat when it comes to a protected community pantry. And Brenda, your nuisance complaint is legally invalid because the state has decreed that giving away free food is a protected civic action, regardless of whether or not you personally enjoy the smell of garlic. There was a long, beautiful, absolute silence on the porch. The only sound was the gentle bubbling of the kimchi in the corner crock. Gary leaned over the binder. He read the permit. He read the cottage food card. He read the highlighted state statute. He read it all twice. Then Gary closed the binder. He clicked his pen, clipped it to his clipboard, and turned slowly to Brenda and Arthur. "Ma'am." "Sir," Gary said, his voice flat and authoritative. "His paperwork is flawless. The structure is permitted. The food is protected under the Cottage Act, and the distribution falls perfectly under the municipal and state exemptions for charitable community pantries. There is no code violation here." "But the smell!" Brenda shrieked, literally stomping her foot on my driveway. "My property values—" Gary's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you drop this. Not only is this operation completely legal, but it's a protected community asset. If you continue to harass him, repeatedly call emergency services for non-emergencies, or attempt to dismantle his property, you will be the one cited. The city takes interference with charitable operations very seriously. Have I made myself clear? Arthur, realizing the ship was not just sinking, but was already at the bottom of the ocean, immediately went into damage control mode. Well, thank you for your time. Gary, we just wanted to ensure everything was above board. Come on, Brenda, we're leaving. Brenda looked like she was choking on a lemon. She stared at me, then at the Crocs, then at Gary. She opened her mouth to speak, found absolutely 0 words, and spun on her heel. She practically sprinted back to her house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the gutters. Arthur gave me one last, incredibly sour look before power-walking back to his sedan. Gary let out a long, heavy breath and rubbed the back of his neck. "Hey, Gary," I said softly. He turned around. I was holding out a massive, beautifully sealed mason jar of vibrant red kimchi. "Off the clock, I guess?" I asked. Gary looked at the jar. A tiny, rare smile cracked across his face. He reached out and took it. "My wife loves this stuff," he muttered. "Good setup you got here, Daniel. Have a good weekend." "You too, Gary." I watched him drive away, leaving me alone on my porch with my beautiful, legal, invincible cabbage stand. I mean, honestly, it was the best feeling in the world. Brenda tried to use the rules to crush a harmless hobby, so I just used bigger, better rules to turn my front porch into a permanent, highly pungent local landmark. And that, my friends, is why you always read the fine print. Never let a neighborhood tyrant dictate your life when a little bit of research and a whole lot of malicious compliance can legally protect your right to ferment in peace. Have fun with this one. It's a ride.